The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like electric prayers. I stood there clutching my wallet, watching numbers climb on a digital screen that might as well have been counting down to Judgment Day. 15 minutes before the most important meeting of my life, and here I was, trapped behind a woman whose grocery bill had just shattered her world. The cashier's voice cut through the ambient noise of shopping carts and distant conversations. "Ma'am, your card was declined. The total is $147.86. Her tone carried that practiced politeness retail workers master, the kind that wraps impatience in silk. I checked my phone again. 3:14. The interview that could change everything was scheduled for 3:30. The corporate headquarters sat 20 minutes away through traffic that moved like molasses on a good day. My resume was pressed and perfect in my briefcase. My suit was tailored to hide every insecurity I'd carried since childhood. Everything was calculated, measured, planned down to the minute. Everything except this moment. The woman ahead fumbled through her purse with trembling fingers. She pulled out cash, counted it twice, then looked up with eyes that had seen too many doors slam shut. "I'm short $12, she whispered to the cashier. "Could I put back the milk?" The line behind us shifted like restless water. Someone sighed loud enough to be heard 3 counties over. A man checked his watch with the dramatic flair of someone whose time was clearly more valuable than oxygen. The woman's shoulders curved inward, her body folding into itself like paper in rain. I should have walked away. That's what successful people do. They prioritize. They focus on their own goals. They don't get sidetracked by other people's problems when their future hangs in the balance. The voice in my head sounded exactly like my father, who'd spent my entire childhood explaining why helping others was a luxury we couldn't afford. But something about her stillness stopped me cold. She wasn't begging. She wasn't making a scene. She was just standing there, absorbing the weight of a world that had taught her to expect nothing and apologize for wanting even that. Her grocery cart told a story I recognized from my own childhood. Generic brands, clearance stickers, the careful mathematics of survival. The cashier tapped her fingernails against the counter. Behind me, someone muttered about efficiency and proper planning. The digital clock above the register seemed to pulse with each passing second. 3:15. 29 minutes to prove I deserved a seat at tables I'd only dreamed of reaching. I thought about the executive who would be waiting for me. Mr. Richardson had built his empire from nothing, or so the business magazines claimed. He was known for his precision, his intolerance for lateness, and his ability to see through any facade. This interview was my one shot at escaping the cycle of dead-end jobs and mounting bills that had defined my 20s. The woman reached for the milk, preparing to sacrifice her family's breakfast to balance an equation that never seemed to work in her favor. Her movements were practiced, efficient. This wasn't her first time performing this particular dance of dignity and desperation. That's when something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped into place. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "Excuse me, I'll take care of this." The cashier blinked. The woman turned to face me, confusion painting her features in shades of disbelief. Behind us, the muttering stopped. Even the background noise of the store seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "I'm sorry, what?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your groceries," I said, already pulling out my credit card. "Let me cover it." Her eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. You don't even know me." I smiled, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. Peace, maybe, or purpose. "I don't need to know you. We all need help sometimes." The cashier shrugged and ran my card before anyone could change their minds. $157.32. Nearly a week's worth of grocery money for me, gone in the space of a heartbeat. The receipt printed with a soft, mechanical whisper. The woman stared at me like I'd just performed magic. "Why?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why would you do that?" I handed her the receipt, my throat tight with feelings I couldn't quite name. Because someone did the same for me once when I needed it most, and because kindness isn't supposed to be rare. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "People like you give me hope," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." I helped her load the groceries into her cart, aware that every second was bringing me closer to being late for the most important appointment of my life. But somehow, the panic had evaporated. In its place sat something I'd forgotten I was capable of feeling. Pride. Not the hollow kind that comes from climbing ladders and collecting achievements, but the solid kind that comes from being exactly who you're supposed to be when it matters. As she walked away, pushing her cart toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of her profile in the harsh fluorescent light. Something about her bearing seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. She moved with a quiet grace that spoke of strength earned through struggle. I checked my phone one more time. 3:19, 11 minutes to make a 20-minute drive. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the moment panic set in. The moment I started calculating excuses and preparing for disappointment. Instead, I walked to my car with measured steps, started the engine, and pulled into traffic that seemed to part like water before my bumper. Every light turned green as I approached. Every merge opened up exactly when I needed it. By some miracle of timing and cosmic alignment, I pulled into the corporate parking garage at exactly 3:28. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor gave me 2 minutes to collect myself. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. My suit was still perfect. My resume was still pressed and pristine. But something in my eyes had changed. The desperate hunger that had driven me for months had been replaced by something steadier. Something that felt like confidence rather than need. The receptionist led me down a hallway lined with awards and photographs of groundbreaking ceremonies. Mr. Richardson's office sat at the end like a throne room, all windows and marble and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's cars. He stood when I entered, extending a hand that felt like shaking hands with history itself. "Sarah Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had to raise it to be heard. "Thank you for coming." We settled into chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He opened a folder that contained my entire professional life, reduced to bullet points and carefully chosen words. For several minutes we talked about my experience, my goals, my vision for the company's future. Standard interview questions that I answered with responses I'd practiced in mirrors and empty rooms. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked the question that changed everything. "Tell me about a time when you had to choose between your own interests and doing what was right." The words hung in the air like incense. I could have told him about any number of professional scenarios, workplace conflicts, ethical dilemmas, moments when I'd chosen integrity over convenience in safe, corporate-approved ways. Instead, I told him about the grocery store. I told him about the woman whose card was declined, about the choice between my future and her dignity, about standing in fluorescent light while the clock ticked toward what I thought was my destiny, only to discover that destiny might be something entirely different than I'd imagined. Richardson listened without interruption. His eyes never left my face. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of him like he was praying to the god of good decisions. $157, he said finally. "Yes, sir." "And you were almost late because of it." "I was exactly on time." A smile flickered across his face like lightning behind clouds. "Tell me, what did this woman look like?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected him to probe deeper into my decision-making process, maybe question my priorities or financial judgment. Instead, he wanted details about a stranger's appearance. "Older," I said, searching my memory. "Maybe 65, 70, silver hair pulled back. She wore a navy coat that had seen better decades. But her eyes—" I paused, trying to capture what had struck me most. Her eyes were kind, tired but kind, like someone who'd learned to expect disappointment but hadn't let it make her bitter. Richardson nodded slowly. And you'd never seen her before? No, sir, complete stranger. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. Black and white, slightly faded around the edges. A woman in a nurse's uniform standing beside a hospital bed where a young boy lay sleeping. The woman's face was decades younger, but the eyes were unmistakable. "This is my mother," he said quietly. "Taken in 1987, when I was 8 years old and dying of leukemia." My breath caught in my throat. She worked 3 jobs to pay for my treatment, cleaned offices at night, took in laundry, worked weekends at a grocery store. I remember her coming home with groceries she'd bought with her employee discount, sometimes just bread and peanut butter because that's all she could afford after my medical bills. He set the photograph on the desk between us, his voice growing softer. One winter evening, she was short at the checkout line. $7 and change. She started putting items back, the way poor people learn to do with their dignity intact. A stranger stepped up and covered the difference. She never forgot that kindness. She told me that story every Christmas until the day she died. The office felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved inward while I wasn't paying attention. Outside the windows, the city sprawled in all directions, millions of people living their separate lives, most of them unaware that kindness could ripple across decades. "The woman you helped today," Richardson continued, "was my assistant's grandmother, Helen Morrison. She's been struggling since her husband passed last year. Medical bills, fixed income, pride that won't let her ask for help." My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. I had no idea. "Of course you didn't. That's what makes it remarkable." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Helen called my assistant in tears 20 minutes ago. She'd never experienced anything like that from a complete stranger. She wanted to know if there was some way to thank you properly." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the impossible mathematics of coincidence and consequence. "My assistant mentioned that Sarah Martinez was interviewing for the director position today. When Helen described you, I realized we were talking about the same person." Richardson smiled, and for the first time since I'd entered his office, he looked less like a CEO and more like someone's son. "Do you believe in signs, Ms. Martinez?" "I'm starting to," I whispered. "Good, because I've been running this company for 15 years, and I've learned that technical skills can be taught, leadership can be developed, but character?" He shook his head. "Character is something you either have or you don't. And what you showed today, what you chose when you thought nobody important was watching, that's the kind of character I want representing this company." The words washed over me like warm rain. I thought about all the sleepless nights I'd spent preparing for this moment, all the mock interviews and practiced answers and carefully crafted stories designed to impress. None of it had mattered as much as one spontaneous act of human decency. "Helen asked me to give you something," Richardson said, reaching into his drawer again. He pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored paper with my name written in careful cursive. "She wanted to write you a proper thank you note." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in the same careful handwriting. "Dear Sarah," I read aloud, my voice barely steady. "I have lived 73 years on this earth, and I thought I had seen everything. Today you proved me wrong. In a world that often feels cold and rushing, you stopped. You saw me when I felt invisible. You treated my dignity as if it mattered, which reminded me that it does. I may never see you again, but I will remember your kindness every day for the rest of my life. You are what hope looks like in action. With all my gratitude, Helen Morrison." Tears blurred my vision. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope like it was made of spun glass. Richardson waited until I'd composed myself before speaking again. "Helen also mentioned something else. She said you reminded her of someone she used to know, a young woman who worked at the hospital where her late husband was treated. Someone who always had time for the families, who never made them feel like burdens. He pulled up something on his computer screen, then turned the monitor toward me. It was a hospital newsletter from 8 years ago. The headline read, "Employee Spotlight, Sarah Martinez, Patient Advocate." Below it was a photo of me, younger and more uncertain, standing beside a hospital bed where an elderly man smiled weakly at the camera. "That's Helen's husband, Robert," Richardson said. "You helped them navigate his cancer treatment, explained insurance forms, connected them with support groups, stayed late to answer their questions when the doctors were too busy." The memory came flooding back. Mr. Morrison with his gentle laugh and terrible jokes. Mrs. Morrison with her knitting needles clicking constantly, making scarves for other patients. How she'd insisted on teaching me her grandmother's recipe for chicken soup. How she'd cried when her husband passed, and how I'd attended his funeral even though I wasn't supposed to get that personally involved with patients. "You don't remember, do you?" Richardson asked gently. "I remember them," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I just never connected. Helen Morrison. She looked so different today. Smaller, more fragile. Grief does that to people, changes them from the inside out. But kindness?" Richardson leaned back in his chair. "Kindness has a way of circling back, doesn't it?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "The position is yours, Ms. Martinez, not because of what happened today, not because of some cosmic coincidence, but because you've been consistently choosing to see people as human beings worth caring about. That's the kind of leadership this company needs." The words felt surreal, like dialogue from someone else's life. I'd walked into this office prepared to sell myself, to convince him I was worth the risk. Instead, I'd simply told the truth about who I was when nobody was keeping score. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you realize how much work comes with this job." Richardson grinned. "But something tells me you're not afraid of hard work." As I prepared to leave, he handed me one more thing. A business card, cream-colored like Helen's letter. "Helen's granddaughter manages our community outreach programs. She's been looking for someone to help expand our charitable giving initiatives. Someone who understands that business success means nothing if it doesn't lift up the community around it." I studied the card, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "You're offering me a chance to do good and do well at the same time." "I'm offering you a chance to be exactly who you already are, just with better resources and a bigger platform." Richardson stood, extending his hand again. "Welcome to the team, Director Martinez." The handshake felt different this time, not like a transaction or a test, but like a promise, a commitment to something larger than profit margins and quarterly reports. As I walked back down the hallway lined with achievements and accolades, I thought about Helen Morrison sitting in her small apartment, probably still marveling at the kindness of strangers. I thought about the ripples we create without knowing, the connections that span years and circumstances, and the thin walls between helping and being helped. And being helped. The elevator descended through floors of glass and steel, each number lighting up like a countdown to a new reality. My reflection stared back from the polished doors, but the woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd ridden up 30 minutes earlier. Something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the surface of who I thought I was. The parking garage felt different too. The concrete walls that had seemed imposing before now looked ordinary, manageable. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, trying to process what had just happened. Director Martinez. The title felt foreign on my tongue, like speaking a language I'd studied but never practiced. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat. A text from my roommate asking how the interview went. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. How do you explain that your life changed because you bought groceries for a stranger? How do you tell someone that the universe apparently keeps detailed records of every kindness, filing them away until the moment they're needed most? I typed back simply, "Got the job." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by, "What? Tell me everything when you get home. I'm buying wine." The drive home took me through neighborhoods I'd driven past 1,000 times without really seeing. Strip malls and coffee shops, dry cleaners and daycare centers. Places where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, making small choices that rippled outward in ways they'd never know. I found myself wondering how many Helen Morrisons were out there, invisible to most of the world, carrying stories that could break your heart or restore your faith in humanity. At a red light, I pulled Helen's letter from my purse and read it again. Her handwriting was careful, deliberate, each letter formed with the precision of someone who understood that words mattered. You are what hope looks like in action. The phrase settled in my chest like a warm stone. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, my heels echoing in the stairwell like applause. The sound felt celebratory now, instead of anxious. Sarah opened the door before I could fish out my keys. "You look different," she said immediately, studying my face with the intensity of someone who'd known me since college. Like, fundamentally different. What happened in there? I followed her into our small living room, where she'd already opened a bottle of cheap wine and arranged crackers on our good plates, the ones we saved for occasions worth marking. The apartment felt smaller than it had this morning, but not in a claustrophobic way, more like a cocoon I was about to outgrow. "I helped someone at Walmart before the interview," I began, settling onto our second-hand couch. "An elderly woman whose card got declined." Sarah nodded, pouring wine into mismatched glasses. "Okay, that's nice, but what does that have to do with the job?" I told her everything. About Helen Morrison fumbling through her purse, about the choice between my future and her dignity, about Richardson's story and the photograph and the impossible connections that had woven themselves through the afternoon like golden thread through dark fabric. By the time I finished, Sarah was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. "That's the most insane thing I've ever heard," she said finally. "It's like something out of a movie. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all have been a dream. But it wasn't. It's real. You're really the director now." She raised her glass. "To my brilliant roommate who just proved that being a good person actually pays off sometimes." We clinked, glasses, but something in her tone made me pause. "Sometimes?" Sarah's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "I mean, let's be honest. How many times have you helped people and gotten nothing back? Remember when you gave that homeless guy your lunch money and then had to walk home because you couldn't afford bus fare? Or when you covered rent for that neighbor and she moved out without paying you back?" The memories stung because they were true. I'd always been the person who stopped for stranded motorists, who gave money to people with cardboard signs, who volunteered at shelters when I could barely pay my own bills. Most of the time, it cost me more than I could afford, and earned me nothing but the satisfaction of having done the right thing. "This feels different," I said quietly. Not because of what I got back, but because of what it showed me about how connected we all are. Helen wasn't a stranger. She was someone whose life had already touched mine years ago. I just didn't know it. Sarah softened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to sound cynical. I'm just protective of you. You have this way of giving pieces of yourself away until there's nothing left." I thought about that as we sat in comfortable silence, sipping wine and watching the sun paint our walls in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I did give too much sometimes. But today had shown me that giving wasn't always about depletion. Sometimes it was about circulation, like blood flowing through a body, keeping everything alive and connected. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Unknown number with a local area code. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe, accept. "Hello, is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was elderly, female, familiar. My heart stopped. "Mrs. Morrison?" "Yes, dear. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Mr. Richardson's assistant. I wanted to hear your voice again, to make sure you were real." Tears pricked my eyes. "I'm real. How are you feeling?" Like I've been reminded that miracles still happen in grocery stores. Her laugh was soft, musical. I've been thinking about you all afternoon, about what you did, but also about who you are. You probably don't remember me from the hospital. I do remember, you and your husband, Robert. You taught me how to make chicken soup. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You do remember. Oh, my dear girl, Robert would be so proud to know you're the one who helped me today. He always said you were an angel in scrubs. I had to set the phone down for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of connection across time and circumstance. When I picked it up again, Helen was still there, patient as sunrise. Mrs. Morrison, I need you to know something. What you wrote in that letter, about hope looking like action, that's going to stay with me forever. Good. Because the world needs people like you, Sarah. People who see beyond their own needs. People who understand that we're all just walking each other home. We talked for 20 more minutes about everything and nothing, about Robert's garden and her grandchildren, and the new job that would let me help people on a scale I'd never imagined. When we finally said goodbye, I felt like I'd been blessed by someone who understood the true mathematics of kindness. Sarah had been listening from the kitchen, where she'd retreated to give me privacy. When I hung up, she emerged with fresh wine and eyes bright with unshed tears. Okay, she said. Now I'm convinced the universe is paying attention. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, mind too full for sleep. Tomorrow, I would start a new life, with new responsibilities and new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, I wanted to hold on to the feeling of this day, the way it had unfolded like origami in reverse, revealing patterns I never could have planned. I thought about the grocery store, about the moment I'd stepped forward to help a stranger. At the time, it had felt like the simplest thing in the world, natural as breathing. But Richardson was right about character being revealed under pressure. In that fluorescent lit moment, with time ticking away and my future hanging in the balance, I'd chosen to be exactly who I was, instead of who I thought I needed to be. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything look softer around the edges. I dressed carefully for my first day, choosing clothes that felt professional but not pretentious. The woman in the mirror looked ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed as I was gathering my things. A text from an unknown number. Good luck today. You're going to do wonderful things. Helen. I smiled, tucking the phone into my purse next to the letter she'd written. Some gifts were meant to be carried, not displayed. The office building looked different in morning light, less intimidating and more welcoming. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like ascending to a new altitude, one where the air was thinner but the view was broader. Richardson met me at the elevator doors, coffee in hand and smile genuine. Ready for the grand tour, Director Martinez? The title still felt surreal, but I was beginning to like the way it sounded. Lead the way. He introduced me to my team, a group of sharp-eyed professionals who sized me up with the efficiency of people who'd seen directors come and go. I could sense their questions. Who was this woman? What made her qualified? Could she handle the pressure? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had something else, something that had been forged in fluorescent light and tempered by impossible coincidence. I had the knowledge that kindness wasn't weakness, that character mattered more than credentials, and that the smallest gestures could reshape entire lives. My office was a corner suite with windows that framed the city like a living painting. On my desk, someone had placed a small potted plant and a handwritten note. Welcome to the team. Looking forward to working with someone who understands that business is about people. The Community Outreach Department. I settled into my chair and looked out at the city sprawling below. Somewhere out there, Helen Morrison was going about her day, probably still marveling at the kindness of strangers. Somewhere else, other people were making choices in grocery store checkout lines and hospital waiting rooms, and 1,000 other ordinary places where character was tested and revealed. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Director Martinez, you have a visitor. Send them in. The door opened to reveal a young woman with Helen's eyes and her grandmother's smile. "I'm Jennifer Morrison," she said, extending her hand. "I run community outreach. I believe we have some work to do." I stood to shake her hand, feeling another piece of the puzzle click into place. "Yes," I said. "I believe we do." As we sat down to discuss programs and budgets and the mechanics of doing good on a corporate scale, I thought about the invisible threads that connect us all, about Helen's husband and my old job at the hospital, about Richardson's mother and her stranger's kindness, about the choice to stop or keep walking when someone needs help. The work ahead would be challenging. There would be bureaucracy to navigate, budgets to balance, skeptics to convince. But for the first time in my career, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Outside my window, the city hummed with 8 million stories of connection and coincidence, kindness and consequence. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human experience, new threads were being woven, new patterns emerging, new possibilities taking shape one small choice at a time. At a time. The months that followed moved like water, finding its level. Each day brought new challenges, new faces, new stories that reminded me why I'd been placed in this position. The community outreach department became my second home, a place where spreadsheets met human hearts and corporate budgets translated into changed lives. Jennifer Morrison proved to be everything her grandmother had suggested and more. She carried Helen's quiet strength wrapped in millennial efficiency, someone who could navigate board meetings and homeless shelters with equal grace. Together, we built programs that felt less like charity and more like justice, initiatives that treated dignity as a prerequisite rather than a luxury. The work wasn't always smooth. There were budget meetings where executives questioned every dollar spent on what they called soft initiatives, board presentations where I had to defend the value of investing in people who might never generate profit. Moments when the corporate world's obsession with measurable returns clashed with my belief that some things couldn't be quantified but were worth everything anyway. Richardson proved to be an unexpected ally in these battles. During one particularly heated quarterly review, when a board member questioned the ROI of our veteran housing program, he stood and shared a story I'd never heard before. About his mother working 3 jobs, about medical bills that threatened to drown a single parent, about the stranger who'd paid for groceries and changed the trajectory of a family's entire future. The room went quiet. Not the uncomfortable silence of people avoiding eye contact, but the deeper quiet that settles when truth cuts through noise. When Richardson finished speaking, the board member who'd been questioning our programs cleared his throat and asked how they could increase funding instead of cutting it. That's when I learned something crucial about leadership in the corporate world. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is tell the truth about your own humanity. People expect executives to be invulnerable, to speak in metrics and market analysis. When you show them the scars that shaped you, when you admit that business decisions are really human decisions dressed up in suits, everything changes. My relationship with Helen deepened into something that transcended the grocery store encounter. She became my unofficial advisor, the person I called when programs felt overwhelming or when I needed reminding why the work mattered. Every Sunday I'd drive to her small apartment where she'd make tea in china cups that had survived 3 generations and tell me stories about her late husband's garden. She never asked for special treatment from our programs, never leveraged our connection for personal gain. But she became my window into the community we served, helping me understand the difference between helping people and helping people help themselves. She taught me that dignity wasn't something you could give someone else. It was something you could recognize and protect and create space for, but never grant. One afternoon in late spring, she called me at the office. Her voice carried an excitement I'd rarely heard, bubbling with the kind of joy that makes phone conversations inadequate. "Sarah, dear, you need to come see something." I found her standing in what used to be an empty lot 3 blocks from her apartment building. The space had been transformed into a community garden, rows of raised beds where neighbors tended vegetables and flowers with the careful attention of people who understood that growing things was about more than food. "The city donated the land," Helen explained, her eyes bright as she gestured toward the thriving plants. "Your company provided the startup funds. But look at what grew from it." Children ran between the rows while their parents weeded and watered. An elderly man explained companion planting to a teenage girl who took notes in a composition book. 2 women shared tomato seedlings while their toddlers played in the dirt with the unself-conscious joy of small humans discovering Earth. "This is what hope looks like when it takes root," Helen said softly. I watched a veteran I recognized from our housing program teaching a group of kids how to identify different types of soil. 6 months ago, he'd been living in his car, too proud to ask for help and too broken to believe things could change. Now he stood in sunshine, sharing knowledge with children who hung on his every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. The garden hadn't been my idea. It had emerged from a community meeting where residents identified their own needs and proposed their own solutions. Our role had been simple: provide resources and get out of the way. Sometimes the best leadership meant creating space for other people's wisdom to flourish. That evening, I called my old roommate Sarah to tell her about the garden. She'd moved across the country for her own career advancement, but we maintained the kind of friendship that picks up exactly where it left off regardless of time or distance. "You sound different," she said, after I'd described the afternoon. "Happier. Like you found your frequency." The phrase stuck with me. Finding your frequency. Like tuning a radio until the static clears and you can hear the music that was always there, waiting to be discovered. For years I'd been adjusting my dial, trying to match other people's expectations, other people's definitions of success. Now I'd found the station that played the songs I was meant to sing. The challenges didn't disappear. If anything, they intensified. Success brought scrutiny from other corporations who questioned whether our model was sustainable. Academic researchers wanted to study our programs, dissecting our methods like scientists examining specimens under microscopes. Media attention brought both praise and criticism, articles that either celebrated our innovation or questioned our motives. But I'd learned something important during those months of building and growing and occasionally failing. External validation, whether positive or negative, had less power when you were grounded in purpose. Critics could question my methods, but they couldn't touch the truth of changed lives. Supporters could celebrate our successes, but their approval wasn't what got me up each morning. What mattered was the veteran who'd moved from his car to his own apartment and now ran support groups for other homeless vets. The single mother who'd completed job training and sent me a photo of her first paycheck with tears of pride still wet on the paper. The elderly man who'd been isolated and invisible until our senior outreach program connected him with volunteer opportunities that made him feel needed again. These weren't statistics. They were people whose stories had intersected with mine in the same mysterious way Helen's had. Each one taught me that kindness wasn't a one-time transaction, but a renewable resource that multiplied when shared. Richardson started including me in higher-level strategic meetings, conversations about the company's long-term vision, and its role in the broader community. I found myself sitting at tables I'd once only dreamed of reaching, but now I understood that the view from the top was only meaningful if you could still see the ground where real life happened. During one particularly intense budget planning session, a senior vice president suggested cutting community programs to boost quarterly profits. The suggestion wasn't unexpected, but it still hit me like cold water. I looked around the conference room at faces I'd come to respect, wondering who would speak first. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Richardson leaned back in his chair and asked a simple question. "What's the point of profit if we lose our purpose?" The room shifted, not dramatically but enough to change the current. Other executives began sharing their own stories about community connections, about programs that had touched their families or neighborhoods. What started as a budget discussion became a conversation about values, about the kind of company they wanted to build, and the legacy they wanted to leave. By the end of the meeting, instead of cutting programs, we'd approved expansion funding. The senior vice president who'd initially suggested cuts became one of our strongest advocates, volunteering to champion our initiatives with other corporate partners. That night, I stayed late in my office, looking out at the city lights and thinking about the invisible networks of connection that held everything together. Somewhere out there, Helen Morrison was probably reading before bed, her apartment warm with the knowledge that kindness continued to ripple outward from that moment in the grocery store. Somewhere else, people were making choices in checkout lines and parking lots and conference rooms, small decisions that would reshape the world in ways they'd never know. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jennifer Morrison, sending a photo from the community garden. The image showed children's handprints pressed into concrete stepping stones, each one labeled with words like hope and grow and together. The message read, "Tomorrow's leaders, planting seeds for the future." I saved the photo to my phone and leaned back in my chair. Outside my window, the city hummed with 8 million stories of connection and possibility. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human experience, new threads were being woven, new patterns emerging, new hope taking root, one small choice at a time. The work would continue tomorrow. There would be more meetings, more programs, more people who needed someone to see them as human beings worthy of dignity and care. But tonight, I sat in grateful silence, understanding finally that success wasn't about climbing ladders or collecting achievements. It was about becoming exactly who you were meant to be, and using that authenticity to light the way for others. The grocery store encounter that had changed my life felt both distant and immediate, like a photograph that had faded around the edges but remained sharp at the center. Helen's words echoed in the quiet office. "You are what hope looks like in action." Now I understood that hope wasn't a feeling, but a practice, something you chose to embody every day regardless of circumstances or obstacles. As I gathered my things to leave, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, desperate to prove herself worthy of a seat at tables that now felt less important than the work itself. That woman had believed success meant earning approval from people in power. This woman knew that real power came from lifting others up, from creating systems that recognized everyone's inherent worth. The elevator descended through floors of glass and steel, each number lighting up like a countdown to tomorrow's possibilities. My reflection stared back from the polished doors, but the woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd ridden up months earlier. Something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the surface of who I thought I was supposed to become. The parking garage felt different now, transformed from a concrete fortress into something that resembled sanctuary. I sat behind the wheel, engine humming softly, watching evening commuters hurry past with briefcases and worn expressions. Each face told a story I was finally learning to read, narratives written in tired eyes and rushed footsteps, dreams deferred and hopes carefully rationed. My phone lit up with messages that had accumulated during the day. Richardson asking for my thoughts on next quarter's community initiatives. Jennifer sharing photos from the garden where vegetables were beginning to push through soil that had once been barren. Helen's granddaughter confirming our lunch meeting tomorrow, where we'd discuss expanding the mentor program to include more elderly volunteers. But the message that stopped me cold came from an unknown number. A simple text that read, "Saw the article about your programs in the Business Journal. Thank you for giving my dad purpose again. He's the veteran who teaches gardening to kids. You saved more than his life. You saved his soul. Forever grateful." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The veteran they mentioned was Marcus, a man who'd served 3 tours overseas before returning to a country that seemed to have no place for his particular kind of broken. When he'd first walked into our offices 8 months ago, his shoulders carried weight that had nothing to do with physical burdens. His eyes held the hollow distance of someone who'd seen too much and believed too little. Now he spent his mornings in the community garden, teaching children how seeds became sustenance, how patience and care could coax life from the most unlikely ground. He spoke to them about resilience using metaphors of root systems and seasonal change, never mentioning war but somehow conveying everything they needed to know about surviving difficult weather. The text reminded me of something Helen had said during one of our Sunday afternoon conversations. "Healing isn't something you do to people," she'd observed while refilling our teacups. "It's something you create space for, like clearing weeds so flowers have room to breathe." Sometimes the most profound transformations happen in the most ordinary places. A grocery store checkout line, a moment when someone needs help and you have the choice to walk past or step forward. That day, I thought I was risking my future for a stranger's dignity. What I discovered was that kindness isn't a transaction with guaranteed returns, but a thread in an invisible web that connects us all in ways we never imagine. Helen Morrison taught me that hope looks like action, and sometimes the smallest gestures create the largest ripples, touching lives across decades in patterns too beautiful to plan.